and skilled, but I'll take it. There we go.
So welcome everybody to this what we call a just-in-time training session for practice educators, taking very kindly supporting our level 4 students both on the undergraduate and the apprenticeship physiotherapy course this time. You will see that on the first slide that's here, there's a QR code, which if you want to scan that with your mobile phone, it should take you to one of our lovely Mentimeter quizzes. If you've not come across Mentimeter before, I apologise. We are a little obsessed with them here at the university, and they're a great way of just getting a little bit of a sense of where everybody is, what sort of things do you want to get out of the session. So I'm going to go on to, I'll briefly sort of talk you through here that we're going to look at a bit of an overview of practice-based learning, first of all. Now, I suspect we've got quite a mix on the call of people who've perhaps never taken students before and some who've taken students a number of times. Forgive me if we do go through detail that's already common sense to you. Look at common questions that come up to us are around students with different needs that are coming out on placements and how do we support those students. So it'll be quite a quick introduction to that today, but there's loads of resources signposted on the slides for you. So if you are new to practice education, then there's some really good super links for you there. Also, we wanted to talk a little bit about one of the key domains for marking that comes up on the Common Placement Assessment Form, the CPAF, is around evidencing evidence. So a brief talk about that. And then the key thing that I think a lot of people probably want to talk about is the Common Placement Assessment Form, the CPAF. So we'll spend a bit of time on that there. So without further ado, hopefully, if you've been able to scan the QR code, if you haven't, if you join, look for menti.com on your browser, and then it should ask you to, do you want to join a meeting? And then you can see the code there at the top for the meeting. So has everybody been able to click on that? So if you have, let's go with the first question then, which is really just to try and get a sense of, oh, here we go, straight in. Who do we have on the course? So if you're an experienced, and you will notice that if you've been with us for a while, we used to call everybody clinical educators. We're now encouraged to call people practice educators. So you're now a PE instead of a CE. There we go, lovely. So it looks like the vast majority are saying they're either new or have not been around practice education for a while. So definitely looking for a bit of an update, which is great. Just give it a couple of minutes. Lovely. And I promise you, you'll all be obsessed with Mentimeter as well by the end of the call. It's great fun. Great. Okay, so that looks like, in terms of the who's on the call, it looks like the vast majority of people have been able to respond to that. So we've got a real mix, haven't we? We've got some people who are really confident. So please feel free at any point during this meeting, if there's experiences that you want to share, or if we're making assumptions about what you already know and you're like, hold on a minute, that doesn't make sense. If you're used to using Teams, you'll see at the top of the screen there should be a little hand symbol. If you want to click on that symbol, it will highlight your picture and we'll come to you with a question. Equally, if you want to type a message into the chat, our lovely Sam is monitoring the chat. So if there are questions or any comments that you just want to throw in, please feel free to do so. So moving on to our next Menti question then, this is a bit of a free-form question. No problem, Olga, thank you. So this is for you to just type any comments or questions, any key things that you would like us to make sure we cover on today's session? I'll give you a chance to assessment. Absolutely. Yep, setting objectives. That's already on our slide, so hopefully we can cover that for you. Assessment paperwork, definitely. The lovely CPAF. Physio apprenticeship, so specifically, any specific requirements for students on the apprenticeship? Just while the comments are coming in, to clarify, the Common Placement Assessment Form, the CPAF, is common between the undergraduate, the regular physio course, and the apprenticeship. It's exactly the same form, and we'll be going through where you can access the form and how you complete it on this call. Inequality marking, might need to explain that, what we want for that one. Difference between level 4, 5, and 6. Yep, we'll certainly be covering that. Grading. Yep. How to prepare students. Yep, we're definitely going to be covering that. And educator expectations as well. And equally, what you can expect from us as well on the to support you on the placement. Great. Okay. There we go. Let's just submit Duncan. Lovely. Okay, great. So I'm going to move on from that question then. So dive straight in, and if you missed that, as I say, do just sort of filter any comments into the chat. It seems like Sarah and Natalie have already got a question about, are students entitled to study leave? So I can certainly answer that straight off the bat from the perspective of the traditional undergraduate course. And apologies, guys, we never really know what to call the regular physio course as opposed to the apprenticeship course. So when I say the undergraduate course, I'm meaning the regular course, the 3-year regular course. So on our course, the students are not entitled to study leave. That said, it's very much to the discretion of you, the practice educators, if in your practice it works to build study time, private study time into the week. If it's sort of physio folklore, isn't it, that you offer an afternoon off each week on the placement. That is entirely up to your discretion if you want to offer that to the students, but it is not a given that they will be entitled to study leave. So I realise that there is a slight difference there, that students on the OT course are entitled to study leave. Sam, did you want to update that as from an apprenticeship perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same for the apprenticeship. So during an apprenticeship, obviously you get that protected study time that you would get per module per week. But when students are on placement, that is all protected study time. So they don't get additional study time while on a placement. So that 3 hours would just be as part of their normal placement week. It's not anything additional. And again, otherwise I would echo what Liz has said there. Also, Liz, to highlight, I think it seems, and sorry, I've been a bit distracted. It seems that some people have joined the previous the meeting link that we had. So I'm just trying to get those people to join this meeting.
Great.
So bear with me a second.
Great, thank you, Sam. Yes, so guys, apologies if you were previously linking in with our colleague Carol. As you may know, Carol has had to take an extended period of leave. So Sam and I are jumping into and all of these slides are very much courtesy of Carol, which we should thank her for here. So kicking off then with what is practice education these days. So there's a lovely link there from NHS England, which you feel free to access at any point. But the key points here are that it is a process. And so when the students come out for, in this case, 4 weeks, we're very much expecting that by the end of the placement, they will have achieved their learning outcomes. Now, certainly for level 4 students in particular, we get a complete and utter range of students, some of whom have got a fair amount of experience in a clinical setting, some of whom have never ever stepped foot in a clinical setting before. And so there will be definitely on this first placement a complete range of experiences. And the learning outcomes that you establish, and we'll be looking a little bit further down the line in these slides, what are the expected learning outcomes for a level 4 placement, but there might be some specific learning outcomes that are specific to your area of practice that you think you might want to sort of put into the learning contract with the student, and those outcomes are to be achieved kind of by the end of the placement. This is one of the only contributions that I've made to the placement, to this presentation, which is the picture of the teddy bear. So it's to say what is it not? What should practice education not be? And it definitely shouldn't be something that you are managing by yourself. Now, hopefully, many of you are working in teams. But if you're not working in a team where you can get support from other colleagues, please be reaching out to us. So certainly if you've not engaged with clinical or practice education, I must remember that, previously, it can feel like quite a lonely experience. And we really don't want that to be the case. So our contact details are at the end of the presentation. And certainly, hopefully, you will have had our contact details before this. So please do feel free to reach out. The other comment here about working with the finished article, particularly on this first placement, as I say, this is the first clinical experience that many of these students will have had. And so our expectations about what they should be able to achieve by the end of it might need to be modified ever so slightly. People are coming in thick and fast, which is great. I'm not sure whether this resonates with anybody, but certainly from the years when I did my clinical education in hospitals, often it could be quite a right. When you come on placement, you do this and we learn in this way. And I think these days it's a much more organic structure that we're encouraging colleagues to consider when students are coming out into the clinical setting. So just wanted to get you to take a moment to think about your own clinical experiences as students on placements, and what great experiences did you have? And if so, what made that a great experience? Was it the person that you were working with? Was it the way the placement was structured? Was it just the fact that you were welcomed onto the placement? Was it the sort of patients you were working with? But then equally, did you have a not so great experience? And if so, why was it not so great? What were the key things that you thought didn't make me feel very comfortable on that placement? Because the chances are, if that's how you felt, that students are still going to feel the same way today. And I don't know whether anybody wants to put into the chat any comments or even raise a hand and share with us either what was great, what was perhaps not so great. I can certainly remember, to kick the discussion off, I can certainly remember level of expectation. I studied the physiotherapy course when I was not 18, shall we say, so a little bit older. And in going out onto my first placement, there was very much the expectation, oh, well, you're a bit older, so you probably know exactly what you're doing. But from a physio perspective, I had no idea what I was doing. So that level of expectation, I see Andrea smiling, was very, very mismatched. Anybody great was a P who had an understanding of level of expectation? Yeah, and that's exactly, and Andrea is sharing that. Yeah, and it can be really scary, can't it, when they expect you to know everything? Totally agree with that. Olga saying, more trust, independence provided. Yeah. And this is something we've been sharing with the students that I certainly felt as an educator, the students are there under my insurance, frankly. And so we've been sharing with the students, look, until your educator feels comfortable that you are a safe pair of hands, you may not be given any kind of level of autonomy or independence, and that will really vary from student to student. So we've been really encouraging them to think about how do I build confidence in you with my own level of practice. We've also got structure of one of placements has felt not learning much. Yeah, I totally hear that. And again, we've now been pushing the students to be the masters of their own learning. So to really take responsibility for their own learning. And if rather than just be bystanders in this process, to actually be coming to the teams and saying, I think I could take on more, or could you point me in the direction of where I could get some additional support or additional learning on this? Of course, one of the problems with a level 4 placement is they don't necessarily know what they don't know and how proactive the students are likely to be at that point. Some of them will be more proactive than others, shall we say, but absolutely, we've got here hands-on and support from the wider team. Coming back to that point about don't go it alone here, most definitely on the level 4 placement, we encourage colleagues to really seek support and guidance from other members of the wider MDT team. Is there an opportunity for the students to go and spend time with the nursing team, or with the OT colleagues, or with speech and language, for example? So it doesn't have to be 100% sort of focused on what you and your physiotherapy team are doing. Some lovely comments here. Great. And realise they will not have done some of the modules. Yeah. On Hasu, gosh, we were super mean sending it to Has. I'm so sorry, Andrea. I'm so sorry. But she's still
I still
here.
haven't worked in there. Never going to has you. In a million years.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So just to give you a bit of an overview about what the students have done by this point. So they've done, and there is a bit of detail later, but they've done sort of core anatomy and physiology modules where they look at the kind of basic functioning of the largely musculoskeletal, but also neurological and respiratory systems. They've done a module which we lovingly call physio skills, where they look at issuing walking aids and getting people out of bed, therapeutic manual handling, and also basic exercise prescription. Now, that said, I should mention that, of course, our apprenticeship students will be picking up on that module in practice over the summer term. Am I right, Sam? Yeah. So,
Yes, that's right. They take it on in the summer term.
But equally, a lot of the apprenticeship students will be used to those kind of skills through working in placement anyway. So hopefully they will feel more confident with that. The other module that students study that they're literally in the midst of studying at the moment is what we call professional practice. And this is where they look at HCPC guidelines, they look at governance, they look at safeguarding, they look at the basics of SOAP notes. So they will have been exposed to all that information, but this will be the first time with you that they're putting it into practice. So some will pick up on it more quickly than others. Fantastic. Let's move on. Did I already cover that slide? So the what used to be called Health Education England, now called NHS England, have put together this lovely document which outlines what they consider to be the principles of practice-based learning for allied health professions. And essentially there are these 7 principles here, which hopefully the majority of you will think, okay, yeah, that I can sort of sign up to that. But one of the key principles that we want to focus in on here that is coming up quite a lot these days is this principle 3, which is that practice-based learning should be inclusive and welcoming to all. Now, what on earth do we mean by that? You'll probably, some of you may have been able to attend the conference that we ran at UEL last year on neurodiversity in the clinical setting. What does that mean? And what are the implications for neurodiverse, either colleagues working in the workplace or indeed for students coming out on clinical placement? Sorry, practice education placements. I knew I'd say that. And so it's for us to be making sure that we're mindful of some of the vast range of diverse needs that people are coming out to us with, and how do we accommodate that within a practice education setting? Now, it may well be that we don't necessarily have the answers to all of that. Certainly in education, we're constantly working with our students who are coming to us with various different diagnoses these days and saying, well, what's the support that we can offer you? How does that manifest for you? What are the specific sort of bits of information that you need that's really going to help us? And is it reasonable for us to be able to offer that level of support? So at this point, please don't feel worried if you think, oh my goodness, how on earth am I going to support these kind of needs that the student has flagged up to me? Feel free to invite us into the conversation. And certainly for Sam on the apprenticeship, we've had a number of meetings already, haven't we, where we've helped colleagues to kind of support students in that practice education setting. And this slide we put up here just to say, does anybody have any kind of strategies that they've already put in place? Have you had students where they've disclosed to you at the start of the placement any specific learning needs? And are there any sort of like experiences that people have had in supporting those students? And again, don't know if anybody wants to share anything via putting the hand up or perhaps in the chat. I'm seeing there's no typing going on. Oh, I can see Mita's having a chat. Was there something you wanted to add?
No, I was just saying I've had students before who have already come with sort of strategies in place and kind of know already how to manage their conditions. But we always obviously ask beforehand anyway, or at the beginning when they first come. But the ones that I've had so far have got sort of quite clear diagnoses and things in place to support them already.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, we will do, as part of the kind of admissions process onto the course, we will very much look at the needs assessment of that student and be very realistic with them about any reasonable adjustments that they might need, and with a kind of practice education hat on as well, to think it's not just about what they might need in the academic environment, but also in the practice setting as well. So hopefully that conversation will already have been started, but there might be very specific setup where you're working that might not be able to meet the needs of that student, or might just present some specific challenges that we hadn't really considered before. So we're all, as I mentioned as well, we also very much encourage the students to take responsibility for their own learning. So if they don't flag issues up to you at the start of the placement, and how on earth can you possibly help to support them? So again, we do reiterate that to all of our students, and hopefully they will take advantage of that. Just seeing we're getting some extra comments here from colleagues saying, I allocated more break times for a student with ADHD and needed time to decompress after situations. That's brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. And we often find that actually some of the strategies that we put in for students with specific learning needs are actually pretty fantastic for most colleagues. Perhaps learners that might need more time because they might have dyslexia, more time to complete their notes. And more often not, that comes up as being, do you know what, this just suits everybody, actually. So we've said previous LinkedIn with disability team at the start of the placement. That's great. So that was a disability team within the trust, I'm presuming, Gemma. And we're saying sending or asking for a one-page statement, helping to set objectives and understand background and needs. Yeah, thank you, Olga. So the students will be asked to complete the first part of the clinical placement assessment form. Generally, we don't ask them to forward that to you before the placement. So it might be that you're just meeting that sort of statement that they write at the very start of the placement. But that is a really important point, Olga, and it's something that we can certainly take away and think, would this actually be helpful if students actually communicated with you before they even start the placement so that support can be put in place there? Great. So there's another link here. I don't want to spend too long on this page, a link there to a really helpful video on YouTube. And once again, these slides will all be made available to you and the recording of the session after we finish today. So don't worry too much. You can go back onto that and have a look at some of the suggestions being offered there. The other thing, just to flag up, that NHS England are currently undertaking this project. It started with our nursing colleagues. So the link there to the Safe Learning Environment Charter is probably a link to work that's being done within nursing. But our colleague Carol Restighini, who many of you will have met previously, was starting to work on that within the allied health team as well. So we're not going to spend too much time on this today, but it is just to flag up that in the upcoming sort of months and years, this will be something that may well be coming out to you within trusts as to how do we support colleagues in the workplace and also students coming out on practice education placements in terms of these criteria. So how do we construct a positive learning environment then in the practice education setting? So the sun is now glinting off my slides, so I'm having difficulty seeing them. So again, this is work that has come out from the HCPC, I believe it is, on how to construct a positive placement experience. It's largely sort of structured around the giving and receiving of feedback. So we've also used this process in our briefing slides, in our briefing sessions with the students around getting them to think about how do they seek feedback, and when they do get feedback, how do they receive that feedback? Because I've certainly seen on some of the CPAF forms previously that colleagues have said, the student needs to think about how they are responding to feedback that's been given to them, and they don't always respond in a very positive way. But equally, it's for us to get you to think about, well, when are you giving feedback? Do you give feedback? I'm sure you do. And if you do give feedback, what form is that taking? Because let's face it, everybody is crazy busy these days. And so it might be that you need to structure specific times. Perhaps it's at the end of the day, perhaps it's after every couple of days, perhaps it's immediately after the session if there's sort of immediate feedback that needs to be given. And so is giving the individual the opportunity to respond to that feedback as well, and what format does that come in? Again, just wanted to give an option for people to sort of share any comments on that, any specific strategies that you possibly use. When do you like to offer feedback? Is there a particular format for feedback that you like to give? So no particular sessions suggestions straight off the. So I'm gonna keep going because I don't want to overrun on our session today. But once again, if this has raised any questions for you, or if you think, oh, I could really do with some strategies for how and when to structure my feedback, please feel free to come back to us outside of this session. So again, if you want a little light reading on pedagogy, on educational science, there's a lovely link there for you, and all the references are available at the end. Andrea's just saying, usually discussed if they have any questions straight after you've seen them. Talk about it in the car in community. Perfect. Yeah. We're often sort of like pushed to say that feedback should be timely. So if you're waiting to give students feedback at the end of a week after a week of working with you, then often they've forgotten the specifics of what happened at the time. So the more timely, as Andrea is saying there, I think the better. So we're saying, Olga's saying, depends on the students. I prefer discussing after the event and seeing them, and then a summary at the end of the week. Absolutely perfect. Okay, moving on. Again, a very busy slide here, but if you've not been used to having students before, then this might give you a few suggestions on how you can sort of structure the supervision and the feedback that you're giving them, how and when to structure that. And the type is very, very small on here. So I'll leave you to review that in your own time after the meeting. And again, the link there is direct to the HCPC website. So there's a lot of guidance on there for you. Particularly during our busy structured time in clinical practice, it can be really difficult to take the time to actively listen to what students are saying, or more often is the case, they're actually not saying. And this is something that we've used to structure our teaching and preparation with the students as well, to say educators are not psychic for the most part. And if you've got an issue, you need to step forwards and flag that up. If you don't really understand what somebody's asking you to do, instead of just nodding your head and passively agreeing to what you're being asked to do, you need to put your hand up and flag up that you don't really understand. Again, that can be quite challenging on this first placement, where the students are just terrified not to please everybody that they're working with on the placement. But it might be that we're having to actually ask the students asking the students just to make sure that they are flagging any issues up with you. I'm going to whiz over that slide because we haven't got time for the workshop. So these slides are all taken from the longer practice education training sessions that we offer sort of 2 or 3 times a year. So outside of because this session, as I say, is aimed at being a very much just in time ahead of the start of the placement on Monday. But if you're feeling, oh, do you know what, I would have valued the opportunity to discuss some of these points in a bit more detail, we've got another session coming up in April and another session coming up in May as well. So do let us know if you would be keen to come along to any of those. So, right, getting into the meat of what most people said that they wanted to discuss today, which is what do I do to prepare for this placement? What support can I expect from UEL? And how on earth do I cope with the CPAF form? So as I've mentioned, before the students come out on placement to you, they will have engaged in the professional practice modules. Certainly the students on the undergraduate course, our apprenticeship students will be engaging with this in the summer term. However, they have all had their briefing where we've looked at some of these factors. So they should be aware of the HCPC standards. which of course have recently been updated, and we're now starting to embed into the course as well. They have all completed moving and handling training in our simulation departments at the university. Apprenticeship students should have completed that moving and handling training as part of their induction within the trust. Likewise with basic life support training. So our undergraduate students all receive a formal basic life support qualification. And again, for apprenticeship students, they should have received that in the trust. And this introduction to basic professional values. So I don't know whether anybody has had the opportunity to go on to e-learning for health, but there's a whole range of courses available there. And so in particular, things like confidentiality and safeguarding is a mandatory requirement that our students will have completed those courses before coming out. I put in the corner here the link to this, the little physiotherapist pocket handbook. Always makes me smile, that, because Jonathan Kenyon studied with me in my year when I studied at UEL, and we voted him the student most likely to make £1 million before anybody else. And I'm sure, given that the number of people that have bought Jonathan's book over the years, he's probably doing quite well. And the students will all have attended. We had an AHP student conference where we kind of blasted through an introduction to SOAP notes, an introduction to the spectre that is reflection. What is reflection? How do students start to engage with that? And on managing their anxiety and stress levels. But I suspect that will be an ongoing kind of work in progress. So we also now engage with this thing called the UEL Capital AHP Passport. So it is a document that the students prepare for themselves, and it basically is a tracker of all their experiences that they are going through as they go through their 3 years worth of placements. It's where they document things like their DBS, their occupational health outcomes, any specific learning needs that they might have. So this is not something that they will necessarily automatically share with you. On the other hand, we have told them that if it's something you would quite like to see, then they should feel free to share that with you. It's not a document that should be marked, though, or taken into account necessarily for the outcomes of their placement. They should have all completed a strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and challenges assessment on their own learning to date. And they should have all engaged with a learning style quiz that tells them how they like to learn best. As I've mentioned, we will have conducted a placement briefing with them beforehand on what they should expect in coming out to placement, and gone through those early stages of the CPAF with them. On the undergraduate course and on the apprenticeship, each trust is linked with a member of staff from the University of East London. On the apprenticeship course, that will be exclusively Sam and/or Barbara. On the undergraduate course, you should have seen on the emails that are coming out the name of the link tutor. So if you don't have that, either get in touch with your PEF, or if you don't have the information from the PEF, again, please do contact us, because we will be happy to share that with you. So I see we've got quite a few colleagues from Nelft. So I'm the link tutor for Nelft, and if you haven't already got my contact details, in fact, I will just type them into the chat here, liz@uel.ac.uk, and I'll be contacting you early doors in the placements to make sure you've got everything you need. I know we've also got contact colleagues on from East London Foundation. That should be our colleague Dora, and hopefully she's already been reaching out to you to offer support. Many of you who've done placements before will be used to organising halfway meetings, and we do love attending the halfway meetings with yourselves and with the students, but we're now really mindful, particularly on this first 4-week placement, that those can be quite difficult to organise and negotiate in terms of time with the link tutors at the university. So whilst we strongly encourage you to organise a sort of halfway discussion with the student, looking at the learning objectives on the CPAF and considering, you know, where they might be at that point in time and what they need to be thinking about going forwards, if it's not mandatory to involve us as link tutors on that meeting, and so if everything's going fine and you haven't got any concerns, then absolutely, you know, really no need to involve us. However, if you do have concerns and you would very much like us to be involved, then we are there to support you. So that's perhaps a slight change to what you're used to if you've offered placements previously. Sam, did you want to jump in and say anything at that point from the apprenticeship?
I think really it's very similar. We our details are on the placement education booklet, what is that called, pack, that you will probably have received. If not, let me know and I'm very happy to share that with you. But all the students have access to that, and on the front page are mine and Barbara's details. And similarly, we won't reach out necessarily, but please do reach out to us at any point if you feel that you would like us to join for those meetings.
Yeah, thank you. Since you mentioned that, can I just ask all of our colleagues who will be supporting students on the regular course, have you had copies of our practice education handbook from UEL? No, definitely not. No, okay. So it's a sort of PDF document that we've got, and it basically, like any handbook, it's not the most exciting of reads, but on the other hand, there might be some information in there that would be helpful to you around the expected objectives of that level of placement. Things around, you know, the question that was raised earlier about, do students get study leave? So outside of this meetings, we'll have everybody's email addresses. I'll make sure that we send you that PDF. The students should have access to it as well, so it might just be useful to have as a resource as well. So we come on to the common placement assessment form. So just on the react button at the top, there should be a little smiley face on your meeting. You can put in there, there's a thumbs up symbol. So can I see from a series of thumbs up who has encountered the CPAF before? Great. Oh, lovely. Oh, brilliant. It seems like, oh, great, lovely. Loads of people have. And I dare say you absolutely love it and think it's the most brilliant thing you've ever seen. So the joy is then, so if you haven't encountered the CPAF before, the links are coming up. So you can see here on this slide that the first link here on the left-hand side is essential information about the CPAF. So a little bit of a how-to guide there. And the second link is direct to the level 4 CPAF, which is available from the CSP website. And if I know a number of colleagues these days are not members of the CSP, so don't worry, you don't have to be a member of the CSP. You can access it directly there. But just to say that the students should already have downloaded a copy of the CPAF because they need to be filling in the first part of it. But equally, it's there for you to download for your own information if you want to. Now, if you've used the CPAF before, there is some hopefully good news for you if you've not used it in the last month or so. So when it was originally introduced, there were these learning domains, and there were about 49 sections in each of the learning domains that you had to allocate marks to, and it all became quite complicated. So it's now been updated. And so there are still the 10 learning domains, but you only have to allocate 1 mark to each of the 10 learning domains. And what you'll see on the CPAF is that at I think it's page 2 of the CPAF now, there is a summary page on there. And the summary page is the overall marks for each of the learning domains. And that's what we look at the end of the placement. you can allocate marks at the halfway stage, and the CPAF form does allow you to do that if you want to. And it's really up to you how you like to practice. Some colleagues like to not allocate a mark because it's just too specific and the student gets absolutely fixated on the mark. But nonetheless, I certainly remember as a student, I was fixated on the mark. I also remember as a student feeling, I'm clearly failing at halfway. So we just encourage, if you don't allocate marks, to just really give a very, very clear description to the student of where you think they're sitting at that point in the placement, particularly in relation to the learning objectives that you've set, so that they can have a really clear guide for the second part of the placement. What is it I still need to be working on? So, for example, if one of the objectives is to construct a comprehensive SOAP note for patients, what are the issues that are still occurring at that midway part of the placement, and what do they need to do to be able to achieve that objective by the end of the placement, so that the student should be left in no doubt as to what it is they still need to be doing. So can I get from people, who likes to give marks at the midway part of the placement, or does anybody prefer not to? So Sophie's saying you normally do, and Gemma's saying we prefer not to. So great. And Gemma, Gemma, Charlotte, Ellie, and Stephanie, do you find that system works? Do you have any issues with that? Andrew's saying you have in the past. Yeah. So don't know if you wanted to put microphones on, guys that have said that you haven't used marks in the past, and say any kind of issues that you've had with that, or does it work perfectly well? But Gemma.
Hello. Sometimes our students do want a mark and they can be a bit fixated. So if that's the case, then we will add one. But we sometimes try not to, especially a full weeker. That just seems a bit premature in the second week. So it varies.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And one of the comments that Carol always raises when she does these training courses is to be very clear with students that if you've achieved a 65% at midway, that doesn't mean that by the end of the placement, you'll be at 65% or 70% or 80%. What it means is that at that particular time, you may be 65%. But she's always very clear with the students, well, I would expect your practice to develop the next day, because if your practice doesn't change in the second part of the placement, you may well find that that mark goes down. And so it's, what are you doing to, if that's where you are right now, what is it that you're going to be doing to improve and take that performance further? So we've often had that with students in the past where they've said, well, I was getting a first at halfway, and how is it that I only got 50% when I finished the placement? And it's because they haven't really moved in the second part of the placement with them. Mita's saying, I tend to say roughly where they are, but now give an actual score, find it helps them. Yeah, absolutely. So it might vary student to student, mightn't it? But yeah, I know there are some universities who don't use the marking scheme for placements, that they just ask you to do either a pass or a fail. We've looked at that many, many times at UEL, and our students tend to do really, really well on placements. So we feel it would disadvantage them to not allocate marks on the placements, because it really helps towards their final degree marks. But we are about to go into revalidation of both of our courses. So you may well find that we're coming to you for your feedback on how we structure the whole practice education system, to help make sure that we are still current with that. Right, moving on. So this is, if you're used to using the CPAF, you may well have seen this this page at the start of the CPAF, and there's loads and loads of information in there for you to read. But we kind of like this slide because it just gives you a bit of a snapshot of what you should expect with the CPAF. So as we're saying, the first part, the pre-placement bit, is the section that the student should be filling in for themselves. And it is this kind of like various different exercises that they need to go through to give a guesstimation of where am I now? So what skills do I already have? What am I bringing out to placement with me? What knowledge do I already have? And what are the things that I think I really struggle with? Am I aware of what my learning needs are? And there will be many students who have already done a formal educational needs review with the university. So they might already have a statement about their learning needs. There'll be others. I know commonly I remember that students would tell me, I prefer to watch you doing everything first, and then I'll have a bit of a go at it later. So some of you may feel, yep, that style works perfectly well. I know other colleagues I've spoken to previously who've said, no, we like students to jump in from day one, and then we work out sort of how they're feeling about that afterwards. Anybody got any thoughts on that? Especially for level 4, I imagine you probably don't want them jumping straight into, yeah, you go off and see those patients and then we'll talk about it afterwards. So the second part then, which is at the start of the placement, so this is where we ask you to negotiate the learning contract with the student. Now, what does that mean? It's basically a set of learning objectives. You know, what is it that you should hope to achieve by the end of this placement? And on the coming up slide, we list down what the standard learning objectives are for a level 4 placement. But equally, the student might have some things that they particularly want to achieve on the placement. More often than not, for a level 4 placement, they're completely unrealistic. By the end of this placement, I want to be running the entire ward. Or by the end of this placement, I want to know everything there is to know about how to manage a stroke patient. So it might be that you are very gently kind of modifying those objectives to be more realistic about what the student can honestly hope to achieve. It might be that you're working in a very specialist area of practice, and there might be sort of very specific outcomes that you think would be great for them to achieve related to your area of practice. Halfway, as we've already said, that's where we encourage you to set aside some time with the student to just review those learning objectives. Where are they at that point? Are they where you'd expect them to be at halfway? Are they on track towards achieving those objectives? If they are, what do they need to be doing in the second half of the placement? And if they're not, what are the issues? Now, this sort of raises the spectre of any concerns that you might have, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the next sort of 2 or 3 slides about when to flag any concerns and what do we do about that? What support can we put in place there? But let's hope that the vast majority of students that you have out won't have any concerns, and that it literally is just that, yep, you're exactly where we expect you to be. Here are the things that you need to be doing in order to achieve your objectives by the end of the placement. And then, of course, there is the end of the placement section where we ask you to allocate a mark. And we do ask at UEL that you are, and the CPAF is structured so that it looks like a range of marks, so 65 to 70, 40 to 45. But we do ask you to allocate an actual number because that's how our regulation systems work for the marks at the end of the placement. So level 4 expectations then. This always comes as a bit of a surprise, actually, particularly if you've not had students before. Level 4 is about this phenomenon called professional socialization, which basically means getting used to being in the clinical workplace. So getting used to engaging with the MDT, getting used to working with a set of notes, SOAP notes, finding out how does practice work in this particular area of specialization. Communicating, so there's a strong emphasis on the CPAF at this level around professional communication. Now, there will be some students that come to you who are super confident in their communication. Some may be a little too confident, but there'll be other students who are really struggling with that confidence to actually step forwards and communicate effectively in the professional environment. Opportunities to engage with other members of the MDT. As we were saying, this doesn't have to fall entirely on yourselves as educators or even with your specific team. There could well be activities that you want to set up for them where they can go and spend time with other members of the MDT. The HCPC now are very clear that students can be supported on placement by any qualified healthcare practitioner. So if it's appropriate that they go and spend a day with the nursing team, as I said, or with the medical team, or with the speech and language therapists, that is absolutely fine and appropriate if that works in with your schedule. The other thing just to put into here, as we mentioned earlier about study time, if it is appropriate within your particular team that you say, well, actually, it would be quite nice for you to take Wednesday afternoon to go off and research. You know, we saw a patient with a particular presentation or pathology, and it would be really nice for you to go off and perhaps prepare a little presentation to show that you've researched that condition. Then that's perfectly appropriate. Can I ask, does anybody tend to do that on placements? Has anybody got experience of that? Thanks, Andrea. And how do you manage that?
Previously, I've either allowed people to sort of they've either stay in the office if they wanted to and look something up. So we've tried to we have previously tried to set up with laptops so they've got access. But if that might not happen in our 4 weeks, I think the other therapist we've got 2 students coming in this time, so we were trying to see if we could do that. But yeah, we might, if we've got access to us, we might say have a look through this referral and take your time and tell me what you think of, but these have been students that previously have had a bit more experience maybe of. So yeah, it's been quite a while since we've had such a fresh student out with us. But otherwise, I've said I've kind of always given like half a day, but I think that's because that's what I used to do. Is I used to get half a day, or I had the option to work a full week and then have a full day off like the following week, the second week, so that basically I could get on with my stuff on a Friday and they could have a day where you said, well, have a read about motor neurone disease or something kind of quite random that they're not going to be able to study in complete detail when they're back at uni.
I think that's perfect, isn't it? And that is an organisation that fits in with your practice there. I think the differentiation there is if you are very kindly giving the students an afternoon off, because the expectation is that they will achieve approximately 30 hours per week on this level 4 placement. So 120 hours over the 4 weeks. Now, you're all probably working a lot more than 30 hours. So as Andrea is saying, if it suits your team to give a half day or a day every week off or whatever that is, that's absolutely fine, as long as they can approximately achieve those 120 hours there or thereabouts by the end of the placement. But that time off would not be counted into their hours. If alternatively you're saying, as Andrea is suggesting, go away and research this particular case, then that could be counted in the, if it's work you're asking them to do outside of the office setting or the face-to-face patient setting, that could most definitely be included in their hours, as long as you they've got an objective to come back and present to you, so you can see that they are actually doing the work, as Andrea's suggesting there. So it is a little bit of a flexible system there, because we want it to be suitable to everybody. But equally, if you say, no, we like to keep students there for the whole day each day, then that's also absolutely fine. What we don't encourage is that students who say, well, what I'd like to do is just work Monday to Wednesday, but I'm going to turn up on site at 6 o'clock in the morning every day, and then I'm going to leave at 7 o'clock. So that means I can get all of my hours in, and then take Thursday and Friday off. Well, that's, I see Mita smiling. Thank you. That's a very nice plan, but it just doesn't fit in, does it? So again, if anybody is coming to you with a request for a way of working that you think that's going to be really awkward to maintain, please do flag that up to us, because we've been very clear with the students that whilst most of you will be very supportive of any, perhaps childcare needs or specific needs that they might have, if they're asking to start at 11 and finish at 2 every day, that probably isn't okay. So again, do contact us for any support on that. So moving on then, I don't know whether you can actually see this slide. The writing is quite small here, but I kind of like this because this encapsulates the difference in learning. Just checking, Olga said, if you work flexible hours with longer days, can the student? Yeah, brilliant question, Olga, thank you. Entirely up to you. I would definitely make that available as an option to the student. We generally tell them that they should expect to work a 5-day week, the kind of like 7 to 7.5 hours each day. But if it suits them and it fits in with their schedule to work those longer days, I think, Olga, you're supporting apprenticeship students. Is that correct? Not yet, not yet. Okay, I don't understand. Did you want to say anything specific to that for the apprenticeship, though?
No, Liz, exactly the same as what you've said. Yeah, if they're happy to
Yeah.
and it works for them, then great. But if not,
Yeah.
then yeah, we wouldn't expect them to do those hours.
Sure. We often get requests from the students who've said, oh, my PE is doing a weekend shift, like an orthopedic weekend shift. And they've said, do you fancy coming along to do that? Now, if it's a level 6 student and they're almost qualified, then the chances are that might be really great, mightn't it? So it really is up to your discretion. If you think that this is something that would be beneficial both to yourselves and to the students, and that the trust is happy for you to go along with doing that, then absolutely fine with us. But on the other hand, if the student is sort of saying, I must get extra hours, I want to be in with you at the weekend, then that's not their entitlement. Sam.
Yes, and just to add on the apprenticeship side of that, Liz, we've had experiences where some apprentices want to work in their original roles over the weekend. And this is something that we strongly discourage them from doing. And the reason for that is that it's just too much. Placement is high stress, and it can be, and it's very demanding. And then to add on additional weekend work, it can lead to sickness or burnout, and it can just be too much. So we explain it as you're on a protected learning time of 5 weeks. So therefore you should be taken off weekend duties for that 5-week period and can return to your normal duties after that. But it's different, as Liz said, if they want to do a weekend with a PE, that's different, obviously. That's the same as the undergraduate if it works for the team.
Thank you. And this is something Sam and I were discussing earlier, that these days we have any number of students on the undergraduate course who are equally working, sometimes full-time, outside of the course, which is terrifying and crazy. But it is just the nature of, these days, if you want to support yourself through university, unfortunately, that's sometimes what they are dealing with. And of course, students have other responsibilities and needs outside of the course as well. So once again, without trying to put too specific a note on that, if you have any concerns about that, if you think, hold on a minute, this student is exhausted every morning when they're arriving on placement, or they're always half an hour late, or they're telling me they have to leave at 3 o'clock because they've got to get to work, I would say trust your instincts. And if there's anything that you think, look, this just doesn't sound right, please do flag it up to us, because often the students will just kind of try and manage it. And we've certainly had students on the course with us who are just, they're going off to do a 12-hour night shift straight after being in class with us. And it is just really unsustainable. We urge them to try and make sure that they take a proper break for the time that they're on placement, so that they can just 100% focus on being on placement with you. So this slide then, if we focus on the column on the left, the level 4 learning objectives, and it's exactly what I was mentioning earlier. So thinking about that socialization, getting used to who's who, what is the structure of the NHS where you're working, or private practice even, and who are the people that you might be working with, what are their roles, how do you communicate with these people, do you go to MDT meetings, and what's the format for communicating in those meetings. Professionalism is a key flag, and how do I put this politely? More and more with students coming to us these days, we're finding that we have to focus and underline this point of professionalism, that yes, there is an expectation that you will turn up on time. There is an expectation that an 8:30 start means arriving at 8:15, so you're ready to start work at 8:30. There is an expectation that your uniform will be clean, and it will be the appropriate uniform, and that the way that you communicate, particularly around absence reporting, so you're not just like not there on a day, because my goodness me, in the last couple of years we've had a number of situations where we've been on the verge of contacting 999 because we're just worried about where the student is, or what's happened to them. And then we eventually get hold of them and they say, oh yeah, I'm so sorry, I overslept. So I don't know whether anybody has had those experiences with students out on placement, but it's certainly given me more than my fair share of grey hairs. We certainly instill that with the students, but again, we do ask that's something that you really underline in your particular practice with them as well. And obviously getting to grips with the SOAP notes. Recognizing risk assessment. Now, we've covered that from a very theoretical basis, and as I say, we have that lovely physio skills module, but again, that's going to vary very much depending on the area that you work with. So and the CPAF will focus on the students' ability to come to terms with that. On the CPAF form, everybody hopefully has seen section 1 of the form. And if you were used to taking students before we had the CPAF form, with the lovely old yellow and pink and blue practice education forms that we used to have, you'll see that the form is separated into this part 1 section and the part 2, where part 1 is the overarching professionalism and safety in practice. And what we're asking you to do there is flag up early on if there are any sort of serious concerns about a student's safety in practice. Now, who hasn't left the brakes off a wheelchair once in their certainly in their student career? But it's if that practice is being repeated, if you're giving safety guidance to the students and they're just not picking up on that guidance. If they are late and forgot to notify you, particularly in the community, and you're off to see patients and thinking, oh my goodness, what do we do? If they're late and haven't notified you, if you sort of bring that to their attention, and yet still on multiple occasions after that, that's still continuing to happen, then that's for us where that would constitute a warning in that part 1 of the section of the CPAF. if they are not sticking to, adhering to the guidance for how to complete notes safely, if they're not getting their notes signed off effectively as they should be. Some of you may be on electronic notes, you know, if they're not accessing the system in a professional and safe way, again, that's where that would need to be flagged up on that part 1. And once again, if you're not sure, if you think, oh, am I just overreacting, or is this actually something that could be a concern, then do reach out to us, because we're more than happy to talk that through with you. So as I mentioned, the other thing that gets flagged up more commonly on the CPAF forms now is I did a little audit of our level 6 and level 5 students that have recently been out on placement, and almost to a person, I'm seeing a dip in their marks on the domain which relates to evidence. And so what we like to talk about now is, well, what counts as evidence? Because I think you can be forgiven for thinking, well, evidence is they're showing us that they're reading peer-reviewed journal articles, and they're bringing those back into the placement to talk about what they think about those. So let me pause again to say, has anybody got any thoughts about what constitutes evidence in that domain on the CPAF? No probs. Steameter. Thank you. And I'm not seeing any comments, so I'm going to whiz on then. Whiz on from that slide, because so evidence could be clearly the sort of the zenith of evidence, if you like, is that the students are going off and researching all these scientific papers and then bringing them back in to reflect back to you to say, I read a multitude of papers on managing the hyperacute stroke patient, and here's what I found out. You know, that would be great, but that's not the only sort of form of evidence that they can be showing you. So here, as it says, you know, reflective writing, we would very much expect these students these days to be engaging with reflective writing, certainly on a weekly basis. Some of them will be doing that on a daily basis. And as Andrea was mentioning earlier, you know, if you've had a particular case, that a patient that you've been working with, and maybe the way you managed that went particularly well, or maybe there were some specific issues that were highlighted that you thought, okay, the next time I need to do that differently. This is the opportunity where the student should be constructing a reflective piece there. Now, here it says reflective writing. These days with technology, we're also saying to students, well, do you know what? That could be an audio blog. It doesn't necessarily need to be a written piece that they submit to you. It could be just them coming back to you and verbalizing their reflection on that situation. But that counts as evidence in that evidence domain on the CPAF, as long as you're seeing evidence that they are engaging in some sort of reflection on their work. And it may be that you say to them, I would like to see evidence of your reflection at these key points during the placement, so that you can see how they're learning. Equally, some places might have access to journal clubs, may have sort of stop and check points on a weekly or a monthly basis that it would be really lovely for them to engage in, but not everybody will be doing that. Can I ask, does anybody incorporate presentations into the placements? Does anybody ask students to compile presentations to deliver at the end of the placement? Andrew's saying yes. Yep, definitely. And Gemma's saying yes as well. Now, it's a lovely thing to do. Yep, or usually a case study, some team teaching, super. It's a lovely thing to do, just to flag up it isn't part of the required learning outcomes for placements. So as long as a student wouldn't be marked down if they're not engaging with that, then it's a really lovely thing, I think, to incorporate into the placement. And already the students will have been doing presentations at the university, so they should be open to doing that with you. And I'm just seeing as well that Olga saying that you asked them to come up. I love that. Come up with objectives for a meeting that you might be going to. So that is ahead of an MDT meeting, and then responding to the feedback from that. Yeah. And all of that counts as no, but we say they can use it for their personal reflection. Yeah, absolutely. So I love this idea of simulation here. I'm not sure anybody has the time to do that on in the busy sort of clinical environment. But if you do have two students on placement together, you know, maybe they can be working through some sort of role play or feedback on certain scenarios, and then coming to you with reflections on that as well. And once again, there are a couple of little links here for suggestions of what can constitute evidence in the clinical setting. Okay, you'll be pleased to know we're coming towards the end here. So Carol devised this lovely flag system to say to you, particularly on this very short 4-week level 4 placement, if you have any concerns, flag them up to us early on in the placement. So even if you think, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm just overreacting, or maybe I'm just sort of like worried about nothing here, far better to either send us a quick email or pick up the phone to us than it is to sort of sit and worry about those, because the risk of failure process, which many of you will be aware of, if you're not aware of, do link in with us afterwards, and we can make those forms available to you. If you are concerned that the student may not be on course to pass the placement, we do ask that as early as possible, we instigate a risk of failure process. What is a risk of failure process? It's basically highlighting what the key concerns are in as objective a manner as possible, and then negotiating with the student, well, what is it that you need to do to actually meet those objectives? Now, if that is the case, more often than not, it means that meeting those objectives will literally just bring them to the minimum level for passing the placement. If you're very experienced taking students, you probably will be comfortable taking on that process by yourselves. But if you haven't had students previously and you've got any concerns about that, for goodness sake, do reach out and involve us, because we're very happy to support you, because it can be very, very challenging in coping with that process. And we find that I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but we find that an awful lot of our colleagues just try and muddle along alone and just think, oh no, we'll deal with this. So don't worry. It's, you know, the student's with us now for 4 weeks, so it's our responsibility to deal with all of this, and end up coping with potentially quite difficult and challenging situations. I don't know whether anyone has had that experience. I certainly had feedback from a colleague a couple of years ago now at a different trust, I won't say which trust, who flagged up that an alternate university, and I won't say which university it was, had made it clear to them that whilst on placement, the student was their responsibility, and that the expectation was that the student would pass by the end of the placement. Now, that may have been slight poetic license with that, but we wanted to make it absolutely clear that you are very much not alone. We are very happy to be there and support you. And actually, you know, on a small number of occasions, it might be the case that the student might not be successful for a variety of different reasons. And if that needs to be the case, we would 100% support you and trust your instincts on that. I'm just checking the chat to see if anybody wanted to share any thoughts on that. Sam, would you add anything to that from the apprenticeship perspective?
No, again, I would just echo that, Liz. I don't think there's anything additional to say. No, I don't think I would add.
Oh, okay. And so, okay, we're back onto the Menti slide then. So if you've still got the link, this is the final checkpoint to say, now this session has been really quick today. And I am mindful that there were quite a few people on the call who've said, oh, I've not had students before. So I will, straight after this session, make sure that you do have access to those practice education handbooks. And if there are still any specific questions that you think, or if you haven't had a chance to have a look at the CPAF yet, and if you want me to talk through the CPAF with you in any more detail, I'm really happy to do that, even if that needs to take place after the placement has started, so perhaps in the first week of placement. So please do feel free to get in touch, certainly with me if you're supporting students on the undergraduate course. And I'm going to volunteer Sam and Barbara if you're on the apprenticeship course, because it can be a bit of a challenge when you're first starting out. That's great. Okay, I love these mentees. So seeing all the different responses coming in. Fantastic. So certainly one of you has been honest enough to say, I still don't really feel like I know what I'm doing. So if that's you, please do contact us and we can talk through in more detail about strategies, particularly around supporting a student who may have some challenges. So that's often one that comes up. Or when to flag up any issues, or strategies around supporting the student with different learning needs. So certainly if that's how you're feeling, we'd be more than happy to support that. Great. I'm going to move on from there because we're coming up to the end of time. And I'm going to move on from that one to say what we would love. So yet another QR code, guys. What we would love from you is some feedback to say, what do you think about these sort of sessions? We really would like to know, does Teams work for you? On the one hand, it's really convenient, isn't it? Because you can tap into the meeting from work. But on the other hand, it is quite difficult to get a conversation going and to share thoughts and reflections. So at UEL, we're aiming to offer some training sessions that are face-to-face and some training sessions that are online, but equally some sessions that are blended where you can join face-to-face, you can come onto site with us, or you can dial in online. We really want to know, what are the topics that you would like to discuss on these meetings? Is there any way that we can refine what we're offering for you? So please do feel free to click on that forms link. And if you haven't got time to do it now, as I say, we will share the recording and the slides with you after this. So always happy to receive feedback from you. Sam, did you have any comments to finish up with?
No, nothing more to add from me. I think I've popped in my apprenticeship points here and there. But I think when you were saying, Liz, that we'll share those practice education handbooks, we'll share both the undergraduate and the apprenticeship ones, although they're very, very similar. It's things like the contact details and things like protected learning time that is a bit different for apprenticeships. So we'll share both of those. But no, if you haven't already popped your email in the chat, please do, because for some reason we can't seem to download emails. So just make sure you do that so that we can get everything out to you.
Thank you. And can I finish off by first of all saying thank you to everybody for joining us today. Are there any questions straight off the bat that we can answer? Thank you, Michael. Anybody got any burning issues? There we go, Lorna.
Hello, sorry, I was just waiting for my computer to take me off mute. Yeah, hello, my name's Lorna. I'm one of the specialist respiratory physios at Medway Hospital. So I just really wanted to ask, one of the students that we had, it was actually sort of last year now, we had some challenging situations with their language barrier. Now, the language barrier was fine sort of on a day-to-day interaction basis and all those sorts of things. But when we got kind of a bit down into more of the clinical side of things and talking about the evidence and the research side of things and stuff like that, it became a little bit more difficult to be able to kind of have that free dialogue between us and discuss that. The student actually done incredibly well, and it was my team at the time support that I feel really supported him to feel confident and comfortable in the environment, which then allowed us to kind of overcome those barriers a little bit more. But I was just doing the QR code as we were talking, and one of the things that I've written on there was, is there anything else that we can do as educators, but also as the university, if we have got a student coming through that potentially has got language barrier challenges, how we approach that. Obviously at the time I did come straight to the uni, and I actually can't remember what uni he was from now, so forgive me if it was one of you guys that I spoke to. But we worked together, and it was really positive. It was a very positive thing to learn from. But I think he was very responsive to it, and I think there is the chance that we don't have as much of a responsive, engaging students in the future that may have those barriers. And I felt like it was just a good thing to raise here. If anyone else has had those experiences, I don't know, but yeah, I'd just be interested to know as a uni if there's anything you are doing or you do routinely.
Lorna, that's absolutely brilliant, and it speaks to what Sam and I's objective going forwards is to actually develop a series of little videos. Like eventually we want to have a portal, and I think the CSP is putting together a portal for practice education where we can all kind of like share little resources and videos. And I think what you've just described there, I mean, the work that your team clearly put in, we can all learn from that. So the strategies that you came up with are probably brilliant strategies for everybody. So we definitely need to be talking to you outside of this, don't we, to understand, well, what is it that you guys did, and does that then mean there's anything that we can be preparing students with? Because we do occasionally get students for whom English is not their first language. They do have to pass. The HCPC has a stipulation of a level of English, but it is quite low. So it can, disadvantage students, I think, in some ways. So no, we're not doing anything specific on that, but that's definitely going on my list of a learning resource that we need to come up with on how do you support that. Sam, what would you say on that?
The only difference with apprenticeships is that one of the requirements, which I've just heard actually has now been dropped, so this may change, is it was a foundation level of English and maths qualification. So that's level 2, I believe. So I think it might be a different standard of English. I'm looking at Liz. I'm not sure if that's the same as the undergraduate. Is it the
I think
same?
it probably is actually, yeah, because
Yeah.
in truth, the HCPC only requires the level of English language competency for when they register with the HCPC. So it becomes quite difficult for us to stipulate that when they're actually entering onto the course. We've always managed to be quite strict on that at UEL, but I know certainly colleagues at other London-based universities have shared with us that they struggle with that the university isn't always quite so supportive with that. But I think that's a brilliant comment. Thank you. And we're going to be coming to you for your experiences on that.
We've got your email
questions
now,
on...
Lorna.
Yeah, we know where you are now.
We've got your email now, Lorna, so we'll have to hunt you down.
One of the key bits was that a lot of my team had been international recruits previously. So they were sort of juniors or senior physios that had very familiar experiences that they then were really supportive. So it was a really good thing to learn from.
Yeah. And, we often link up a lot of our international students as well and actually say, do you know what, support each other. We've got a mentorship system at UEL where level 6 students support level 5, level 4 students. because they come up with strategies that we would never have thought of often. So it is really good. We just need to capture that. And Olga saying, I graduated from Masters Pre-Reg and you asked to provide evidence. Olga, do you know what level of English language qualification did you have to have? Do you remember? It's normally, I mean, it's a grade C at GCSE level.
So in my case, I think they were asking for the TOEFL, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I worked in a uni here before my course. So I provided they had a publication. I was teaching in a university as well, so it was enough for them.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It exceeded the level of most of us, I would imagine. Yeah. So it's and you know, I sort of laugh at that because again, we've had a student start with us this year who has 2 master's degrees, isn't originally from the UK, but completed both of his master's degrees in English, and the university is still asking him for a GCSE qualification in English. And we've sort of said, oh, can we not just take a reasonable approach here and realize that this student speaks English probably better than the rest of us?
Yeah.
You know,
I had very similar. So my degrees are from my country, so I didn't do degrees here, but I provided them evidence that I have a publications in the journals, research journals, and then also that I worked for the uni here, and they were happy with it.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, and but we also have students from Australia who are asked to prove that they can speak English, which just, yeah, it baffles me. But anyway, brilliant, thank you. Any other questions for us? Because I'm mindful we are 2 minutes over our allotted time now. I'm going to just stop recording at that point because I always forget, and just say, look, thank you so much.